Hi, boys and girls. I'm going to continue reading from Hello, Mrs. Piggle for a few minutes today. So remember when we left off, Melody, the crybaby, was having a hard time, and her mom has been suggested that she call Mrs. Piggle. I can find nothing wrong with Melody physically. Then I would suggest that you call Mrs. Piggle. Will she know what to do? Mrs. Foxglove asked. She certainly will, said Dr. Pillsbury. She knows more about children than anybody in this town. Well, I know she's cured Cornell's table manners, and she stopped Emily's tattling, but I didn't dream she could do anything about crying. I'll bet she can, said Dr. Pillsbury. My goodness, Martha, these brownies are so good, it's criminal. I want you to make a solemn pledge you won't give Eunice the recipe. I'm much too fat as it is. Mrs. Foxglove laughed and looked very happy. Then Melody came shuffling and snuffling downstairs. By this time, her face was sort of purple plum color. Her nose was like a ripe strawberry, and her mother couldn't see her eyes at all. Dr. Pillsbury said, "Come here so I can see how heavy you are." Slowly, hiccuping with every step, Melody walked over to him. He lifted her up and sat her on his knee. Then he said, "Whew, you're quite a chunk for 8 years old. Stick out your tongue." Dr. Pillsbury looked at her tongue, looked down her throat, looked in her ears, listened to her lungs and heart, poked at her stomach, and took her temperature. When he had finished, he said, "Sound as a nut, except for a very advanced case of acute 8-year-old saditis. Better call Mrs. Piggle before a certain party's tear ducts wear out." After Dr. Pillsbury had gone, Mrs. Foxglove sent Melody and Emmy next door to Mrs. Rocket's house to borrow an onion, while she called Mrs. Piggle. Mrs. Piggle laughed when she heard about Melody and said, "Oh, I've got the most wonderful cure for crybabyitis. It's a tonic that tastes delicious, sort of like vanilla ice cream with caramel sauce, and it works very quickly. In fact, if you would send Harvard and Cornell over for it right now, I think we could have Melody cured before Trent and Tansy Popsicle's birthday party on Saturday." "Oh, do you think so?" asked Mrs. Foxglove, almost crying herself. She was so happy. "Certainly do," said Mrs. Piggle. "Tell the boys I sent in and got those new super secret outer space other hemisphere 10-way wrist communicators they wanted. That will make them hurry." "Oh, thank you, dear Mrs. Piggle," said Mrs. Foxglove. "Tell the boys to hurry," said Mrs. Piggle. "It's getting dark and the streets are slippery." When Mrs. Foxglove called to Harvard and Cornell and told them she wanted them to run an errand for her, they groaned and said, "Way over there? Golly, and my gosh, just when we're busy sanding this old table, and why can't somebody else in this family ever run any errands?" Then she told them about the super secret outer space other hemisphere 10-way wrist communicators, and they were upstairs jamming on their galoshes and coats in 2 seconds. Then Melody and Emmy came back from Mrs. Rocket's with the onion, and Melody was bawling because she had gotten slush in her boots, and Mrs. Rocket's dog had jumped on her, and it was too cold outside, and her eyes hurt. Mrs. Foxglove helped her off with her coat and took her upstairs and put cold cloths on her eyes. The cloths weren't very cold, but Melody screamed in pain each time her mother touched her until Mrs. Foxglove finally said, "I declare, you must like to look like a stewed tomato." Emmy laughed, but Melody immediately began to cry. Mrs. Foxglove sent her to her room to stay until dinner was ready. When Mr. Foxglove came home, he was very cheerful, especially when he found out that Mrs. Foxglove had chicken and dumplings for dinner. Then Melody came sobbing downstairs to report that somebody had used her toothbrush, and she could tell because it was wet. Her daddy said, "Are you sure it just isn't wet with your tears?" Melody said, "After all, Daddy, I don't brush my eyes with my toothbrush." Very logical," he said, putting his arm around her. "But of late, you have been as soggy as a bath sponge, and dampness rubs off, see?" He held her off so she could see the big wet spot on his jacket where her head had rested. In fact, he said, as he rubbed at the spot, "You are one of the juiciest children I've ever cuddled." Melody began to bawl, opening her mouth wide and scrubbing at her eyes. Mr. Foxglove handed her his handkerchief and said, "Come on now, Missy. That was only a joke, and you know it. Dry those eyes, or the place where they used to be, and let's have dinner." "Where are the boys?" "They'll be here in a minute, Juniper. In fact, I hear them now," said Mr. Foxglove. Cornell and Harvard burst in the back door, their cheeks red from the cold, their eyes dancing with excitement. Thrusting their wrist at their mother, they said, "Mom, just look what Mrs. Piggle sent away and got for us. Super secret, outer space, other hemisphere, 10-way wrist communicators. Aren't they keen? See all the signs of the zodiac and the dials?" Mrs. Foxglove looked at it and said, "Now, for heaven's sake, be very careful how you use those things. I don't want to be deluged with people from another planet." "Oh, don't worry, Mom," Harvard said. "We got all the directions right here in this little book." "Didn't Mrs. Piggle give you something else?" asked Mrs. Foxglove. "Oh, yeah, she gave us this little bottle," Cornell said, as he rummaged through the pockets of his jacket, taking out nails, string, 4 peanuts, 2 rocks with gold in them, a note to his mother telling her about a PTA meeting, which had happened 2 weeks ago, and to which she'd gone anyway, several nuts and bolts, 2 gray licorice drops, and finally, a small bottle wrapped in brown paper. After she had sent the boys up to wash, Mrs. Foxglove carefully unwrapped the bottle. It was labeled, "Cry Baby Tonic, 1 teaspoonful as needed." Mrs. Foxglove pulled out the cork and smelled it. It smelled delicious. She called Melody, who was standing in the front hall, dabbing at her streaming eyes with her father's handkerchief, to come out to the kitchen. She poured the tonic into a rather large teaspoon and very briskly told Melody, who was leaning mournfully against the stove, to open her mouth. Melody began to cry. "I don't want to take any bad tasting medicine," she sobbed. "I'm not sick." "This isn't bad tasting. It's delicious," said her mother, taking advantage of her open mouth to force the spoon in. Melody gulped down the medicine and then said, "It's good. I like it. Can I have some more?" "Not now," said her mother. "Perhaps another teaspoon before you go to bed. Now help me carry in the salad plates." The first thing Mrs. Foxglove noticed about the effect of the cryberry tonic was that all the redness and swelling disappeared from Melody's face. "She's probably already cured," thought her mother happily. The chicken and dumplings were delicious. Everybody was having a very good time until Cornell, who sat next to Melody, sneaked a chicken bone down to Highboy, who was never supposed to be fed at the table, but was usually lying under it ready in case somebody should spill. Anyway, in reaching for the bone, Highboy put one paw on Cornell's knee, which was covered with jeans, and the other on Melody's knee, which was bare. Highboy didn't mean any harm, but dogs do have toenails, and he may have scratched her a little, but certainly not enough to warrant the banshee howl she let out. "Ow, Ollie!" she cried. Then the strangest thing happened. Out of her eyes gushed 2 regular faucets of tears. They filled her dinner plate with water, soaked her table mat, soaked her napkin, made a little lake in her lap, poured down her legs, and filled her shoes. In fact, in no time at all, there was a huge puddle around her chair. "My gosh, Mom, look at old Melody," said Cornell, his eyes as big as dollars. "Mom, Dad, quick, stop her," said Harvard, as Melody's gushing tears ran across the table and into his lap. "Melody, you big dummy," said Emmy. "You've cried all over Bruno's clean romperth." Mrs. Foxglove said, "Juniper, do something quick. There's water clear over here under my chair." Mr. Foxglove yelled at Melody, who was now soaking wet from head to toe. "Stop crying! Close your mouth! Smile!" Melody did, and the tears stopped. Everybody stared at her in wonder. "I've never seen so many tears in my whole life," her father said. "How in the world did you do it?" "I don't know," Melody said. "I just started to cry and the tears came out." I'm going to rent you out to water lawns, her daddy said. Salt water kills grass, Cornell said. Mrs. Foxglove said, instead of talking nonsense, let's all get busy and wipe up the water. And we're going to stop there today, boys and girls. See you later.